I'm proud to welcome such an accomplished man to show the great power of courageous leadership, Dr. Bernard Franklin.
Good evening. Thank you for welcoming me here. I'm honored. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Dr. Cohen. Thank you to the faculty and staff of this great institution and to the community of Pittsburgh. I am honored as a no-name to be here. A no-name because you could have selected any of the well-known authors, historians, actors, sports people, or even TV personalities. But I see myself as a local commitment worker in Kansas City and throughout the country, helping people to achieve their goals and their dreams. I'm better known in my community in a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt. But I'm here tonight to say to you, we can make a difference if we want to. We can make a difference if we care. We can make a difference if we move forward and just begin a little bit. I'm here tonight also because I'm friends with the King family. And I'll take a moment to explain that to you because I want you to understand in a short way that I'm going to share some bits of history, some bits of information about Dr. King that you may or may not know. My family picked cotton in Oklahoma. My parents were sharecroppers. They were very poor people who decided their children would not be poor. They moved to Wichita, Kansas to work for Boeing, but my dad never did get on at Boeing. My dad ended up working for the U.S. Post Office for 33 years sorting mail, the same job he began with. I'm the oldest of 7. I really had 2 choices: go to school or stay home and go to the streets. Now, I'm sure you're sitting back saying, what streets in Kansas City? Well, friends, we have a small, relatively small community of poor people, but understand there's poor people all around the country. I decided I would go to Kansas State University. It was a great challenge to be one of the first African Americans during this period when Kansas State, an agricultural school, a Grandland institution, was recruiting students of color. I had 5 roommates that first semester, but they survived and I survived. But you know what? I went on to say that I didn't care what they did to me. I was going to make a difference. I was going to get ahead because I'd gone through this list, as we described a few minutes ago, a list of affirmations. I knew who I was, and I was not what they were trying to make of me. I knew where I came from, and I knew where I was going. Now, I was not much of a party guy, although I did do the bump, and I won a few dance contests teaching my friends how to do the double bump. I wore a kicking afro, and many times I had my pick in my hair. But I was serious about going somewhere and serious about making a difference. I graduated and went to work for AT&T in Kansas City. Now, my younger brother defies my dad. My younger brother says, I'm not staying in the state of Kansas, I want another experience. Dad wanted us all to stay in Kansas because it was cheaper on his budget. Cheaper because in-state tuition was a little less than out-of-state tuition. But this aggressive young man said, I'm going to defy my father, so he decided to go to Morehouse College. Dad said, go ahead, but I'm not paying for it, and I'm not driving you there. So little brother calls big brother, who's working at AT&T at the time, and says, Dad won't take me. Will you drive with me to Atlanta? So we get in our Nova and drive from Kansas to Atlanta, Georgia, a little green Nova. We get to Morehouse, check in at the residence hall, walk up to the door, and there's my brother's name, Gregory Ronald Franklin. We were proud to see the name, but stunned to see the name below it, Martin Luther King III. Now we're standing outside the door. You got to picture this. We're standing outside the door saying, yeah, cotton picker sons are going to have Dr. King's son as a roommate. We're just common people, common bread and butter people from the Midwest. So we're thinking someone's changed the name. We're going to get inside and there's going to be someone else inside the door. Well, sure enough, we walk in and there's Martin. Martin is wonderful. Martin says, just call me Marty. So we call him Marty. We exchange a few familiarities, have some conversation. Marty says, Bernard, where are you staying? And I said, Marty, I'm staying at the Omni. Marty says, oh, no, don't stay there. Check out of your hotel, and I want you to stay with my mom and my little sister, Bernice. Now, friends, it doesn't take a poor young man long to realize he's had an invitation of a lifetime. I went back to the Omni Hotel, checked out of the hotel, took my bags to Sunset Avenue, knocked on the door, and Miss King comes to the door. Now, she's gracious, she's wonderful. Her hair looks like she just stepped out of the beauty shop. She already knows my name because Marty called and said, Bernard's on his way. She greets me, she invites me in, she shows me my bedroom. Wonderful. Friends, it is a week that defines Bernard Franklin's life. Because here I have an opportunity to talk to a woman, to go deep into a woman's life about a man I have had great admiration for many, many years. So I go to the bedroom, check my stuff. We end up having a conversation. Oh, like many of you, you're wondering what good can come from Kansas? We talked about what good could come from Kansas. She talked about Dodge City. Wanted to know if there's any tumbleweeds that roll down the streets. She even asked me if there was a place for Dorothy and a land called Oz. We had some great conversation, but I think it was day 2, day 3, America bombed Libya. The first time we went after a man, remember, called Gaddafi. Kings, queens, presidents, leaders of foreign countries were bursting the phone, trying to get Mrs. King's attention, wanting her to explain to them or give some discussion about how would Dr. King respond to America's aggression against a small country. Conversation after conversation, I watched this gracious woman articulate with great grace and great dignity how she thinks her husband would respond against violence, against great use of force, against a small country. And each time she would end the phone with, Martin would be honored that you called to ask about how our country and our world deals with human relations without violence. In between those conversations, we would get personal. We would talk about things. Mrs. King asked me, what did I want to be? What are you pursuing? What do you want to do with your life? And friends, I had never told anyone. I'd always tucked this away, way deep down, because you got to understand, a little African-American boy from Kansas probably doesn't have much opportunity to get to where I wanted to go. So many of my friends probably would look at me and say, yeah, right. Well, I told her, Mrs. King, I want the White House. I want to be the first African-American president of the United States. Mrs. King tucked that away. I saw the look on her face. And I'll give you a bit more as we continue this conversation. As we talked further, I wanted to know how a young man, the age of 26, could step into the most demanding, the most humiliating, the most pressing role, stepped right into Montgomery, Alabama. I wanted her to tell me what possessed him, what caused him to move from comfort, what caused him to say, I have to do this, I must do this. And understand, I'm 24 years old when I'm having this conversation. So I'm realizing that I'm just 2 years away from where he is, and he is stepping into Montgomery, Alabama, where on any day, men could come pick him up, men could shoot him in his back, men could take his very life. What causes a man, 26 years old, to walk into Montgomery, Alabama, to defend women who want to sit at the front of buses? What causes a man to give up his life, knowing that at some point it may happen? What causes a man I wanted to know this. And so in between the conversation, Mrs. King would say, Martin knew his God. Martin knew who he was. Martin knew where he stood in relationship to God. And Martin knew from a very young age, and I'll go through some of that, Martin knew this was the call on his life. What call do you have? What sense of purpose do you have? What fears keep you from walking into your realities? What do you need to do to overcome the fear to walk into Montgomery? It's the challenge I bring tonight, the challenge I want to leave behind, because too many of us buck and tow behind other people. We cower behind somebody else's dream. We walk behind somebody else's line, but we're too afraid to walk alone, too afraid to stand alone, too afraid to be different, too afraid to say what we need to say, even in the midst of challenge. I challenge you, Pittsburgh. Don't let this be just another holiday celebration. A man bled and died so we all could be here. A man gave up his life. One man. One man. So we talked more. We talked a lot about the civil rights movement, because I wanted to understand. You need to know, when I was a young man, that's all we watched on TV. I knew Walter Cronkite like he was a family member, because we watched news. And on occasion, we watched Ed Sullivan, especially when the Supremes or any of those good people were there. But my dad was a news junkie. And so anytime we knew civil rights or King was going to be on the news, all family front and center. So he was my man. So I wanted to know about the movement. And so we would talk, and then I'd look around the room and I'd see this sparsely decorated house. You know, many of your homes, we have stuff everywhere. We got pillows, we got divans, we got chairs, we got stuff all over the walls. But this house didn't look like that. It wasn't cluttered. There wasn't a lot of stuff there. So I'm saying to myself, drawing some conclusions, I'm saying, Mrs. King, how are you making it? In her dignified manner, Mrs. King always paused, even when she was on the phone. Mrs. King paused and said, Bernard, you know, if it wasn't for the Jewish community, I wouldn't be here. I paused. That was not what I expected. So she carried it on, because she could see the look on my face was a startled look. So she said, let me tell you something more. If it wasn't for the Jewish community, there would have been no civil rights movement. Pause. Pause. So tonight I say to the Jewish community that's here, thank you. Thank you. A community that doesn't need recognition. A community that doesn't even tell Mrs. King where the checks come from. All she knows is she can count on it. And friends, let me tell you, you might have wondered how Jesse Jackson made his living. You might have wondered how Reverend Abernathy made his living, the Jewish community. And you think about all the buses. You think about all the coordination. You think about all that needed to be done to get people where they needed to be. We owe a debt of gratitude to the Jewish community for what they've done. And I salute and say thank you this evening to the Jewish community that's here tonight. For our community owes you a debt of gratitude for standing with us at a time when we needed it. Now understand, the conversation then went, Mrs. King, you got to help me understand. Because when I looked at my black and white TV, I thought I saw white people there. And so I'm saying, were there no Baptists there? Were there no Methodists there? Were there no clergy from the Lutheran Church? Mrs. King smiled and said, Bernard, the Southern white churches did not do a thing to help us. In fact, you need to understand, the churches supported the Klan. The churches did everything they could to keep us from doing what we needed to do. She said every now and then there might have been a sprinkle from the north of Catholics young who would come and sit at the counters. And so, friends, my message tonight is the fight is not over. We need some Caucasians to step into Montgomery, and let me just bring it closer. We need some Caucasians to step into Pittsburgh. You know, I've appreciated the term ally. I appreciate the term support. I appreciate the term I'm in your corner. But friends, you're not walking with me unless you're walking with me holding my arm. I don't want your check. I've said to churches around the country, don't send another check if you're not going to take that check personally. Methodist Church, Lutheran Church, Catholic Church. And for so many of them, they've left our community anyway. I want you to come back. So for me, I'm saying clearly, this is all of our war. This is all of our fight, and we all have to step into it. Pittsburgh, come alive. So that was very an awakening for me to understand that the church was not there. You see, I grew up Pentecostal. And my Pentecostal roots has some connection because there was a white Pentecostal and a black Pentecostal. And all of it, when you stop and think about it, you get so tired of saying black church and white church. When there's one God, overall. So at some point, Pittsburgh, we got to come together. We got to make it work. So I got more and more information from Mrs. King about this man because I wanted to understand how in the midst of that, you're looking at pastors that maybe are your friends or pastors that you have meetings with, but they're on the other side. How does that man do this? How does he walk that walk? Well, to put some of this in context, because I realize not everyone is from America in this room tonight, I want to just go through a little bit of the story, a little bit of who Dr. King was, and I'll interject at some different points, some things that I was told personally from here that you may not get in a book. But let me just begin by saying Dr. King was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1929. As a child, he never failed to ask discerning questions about the world around him. Mrs. King said he was always asking questions to his mother and his father. Though his father was a reverend, King initially had many doubts about the Christian religion, as it was only after years of schooling that he became convinced that religion could be both intellectually and emotionally satisfying. King learned to read before he entered grade school. He attended Oglethorpe Elementary School, which was a private school associated with Atlanta University. His parents paid $25 a year, which covered all of his expenses. Miss Lemon, one of his favorite teachers, taught him how to be independent. She taught him if there was an injustice that he could rebel, but still keep his dignity and find quiet ways to resist. She inspired her students to learn about Black history and take pride in their heritage. She took the class on field trips to visit the successful Black businessmen and professionals. Her students started each day by singing the song, "Lift Every Voice and Sing." Mrs. King said he talked about Mrs. Lemon quite a bit. He went on to attend Booker T. Washington High School in Atlanta. He was younger than most of the students and also skipped some subjects because he already knew the subject matter. On one occasion, he and his teacher were riding on a bus. When the bus filled up with people, the driver asked him to stand up and let two white people have their seats. It was the law, but Martin saw this as injustice, and he never forgot the incident. When he was 15, he entered Morehouse College. After 2 years, he decided he could best serve others by becoming a minister at age 17. He became assistant minister of Ebenezer Baptist Church, where his father was minister. The following year, he graduated from college, from Morehouse College. He was age 19. King was born Michael Luther King Jr. And I say that slowly because I want you to understand that. When the boy was 6 years old, two white playmates were told not to play with him. And his mother had to explain about segregation, that it was a social condition and he was just as good as anyone else. But his father lifted his vision even higher. He told him about a German Reformed theologian by the name of Martin Luther, the great leader of the Reformation. And he said, from now on, we both will be named after him. That's where Martin Luther King came from. In 1948, Martin Luther King Jr. took his sociology degree from Morehouse College and attended Crozier Theological Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania. There he thrived in all his studies, becoming valedictorian of his class in 1951 and elected student body president. He earned a fellowship for graduate study, but Martin also, and this is just information I want you to have because I want you to understand, I think so many times we've put him on a pedestal and we've said he wasn't human, he wasn't part of us, but this man was. He had his challenges, he had his issues, he had his struggles with life like we all have had. But he rebelled in graduate school against his father's more conservative influence by drinking beer and playing pool while at college. Now to us, that does not sound like but understand, in 1950, drinking beer as a minister, playing pool was not considered cool. He became involved with a white woman and went through a difficult time before he could break off the relationship. But he did. During his last year in seminary, Martin came under the influence of theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, a classmate of his father's at Morehouse College. Niebuhr became a mentor to Martin, challenging his views of theology. Niebuhr was probably the single most important influence, other than Mahatma Gandhi, on Martin's intellectual and spiritual development. After being accepted at several colleges for his doctoral study, including Yale and Edinburgh, In Scotland, King enrolled in Boston University. During the work on his doctorate, King met Coretta Scott, an aspiring singer and musician at the New England Conservatory School in Boston. They were married in June 1953 and had 4 children. Then you know the rest. You know much of the rest. On March 2nd, 1955, a 15-year-old girl refused to give up her seat to a white man in Montgomery. Claudette Colvin was arrested and taken to jail. The rest became history. On the evening of 42-year-old Rosa Parks boarded the Cleveland Avenue bus to go home from an exhausting day at work. She sat at the front row of the colored section in the middle of the bus. As the bus traveled en route, all the seats in the white section filled up. Then several more white passengers boarded the bus. The bus driver noted there were several white men standing and demanded that Parks and several other African Americans give up their seats for the white men. 3 other African American passengers reluctantly gave up their places, but Parks, tired from her day, refused to get up. The driver asked her again to give up her seat, and again she refused. She was arrested, booked for violating the Montgomery City Code. At her trial a week later, a 30-minute hearing. So when Dr. King heard all of this, he pondered it. He thought hard, Mrs. King said, but he came to a conclusion. He said, "We have no alternative but to protest. For many years we have shown an amazing patience, but we have come here tonight to be saved from patience that makes us patient with anything less than freedom and justice." When King arrived in Montgomery, let me say it again, when King walked into Montgomery, he saw a city that was highly segregated. One of the Jim Crow laws required the first 4 rows on public buses to be reserved for white people, while colored riders had to sit in the back of the bus. Yet barely after he arrived, this incident happened with Miss Rosa Parks. The Montgomery Improvement Association was formed with the NAACP Executive Committee and officers of the Montgomery NAACP, which had at that point been banned in the state. The boycott lasted for over a year, during which time King was threatened, Mrs. King said arrested, and even had their house bombed. However, by December 1956, the MIA had won a clear victory. The United States District Court ruled in Broader versus Gale that racial segregation on buses was unconstitutional. It wasn't just that Dr. King became the leader of the civil rights movement that made him so extraordinary. That's what I want to capture for us tonight. It was the way in which he did it. King advocated civil disobedience, the nonviolent resistance against unjust laws. Nonviolence, he said, is a powerful and just weapon which cuts without wounding, ennobles the man who yields it. Civil rights activists organized demonstrations, marches, boycotts, strikes, and voter registrations and drives. The peaceful forms of protest were often met with all kinds of vicious threats, vicious rumors, beatings, and worse. But King continued to emphasize how important it was that the civil rights movement not sink to the level of the racist behavior and the hate mongers that were fighting against them. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. King's philosophy of tough-mindedness and tender-heartedness was not only highly effective, but it gave the civil rights movement an inspiring moral authority and grace. Well, friends, the rest is history. You all know about the March on Washington. And if any of you have watched CNN or any of the shows today, they probably played a piece of that. Well, as it has been stated already, our world is in crisis. We're suffering from a dearth of leadership. And probably some of that same dearth happens here in Pittsburgh. But friends, I'm on a university campus where there's new leadership budding here. I'm in a community that I know needs leadership, the greater Pittsburgh area, but also the campus that I'm speaking to. Leaders are blown from side to side by the powerful winds of political correctness, society whims, and self-greed. Truth is ignored and life and death decisions are postponed. Arrogance has replaced discernment, and small-mindedness has overtaken vision and principle. All this is seen as the status quo is maintained. We cannot continue to maintain the status quo. Friends, as long as we sit in this room and go back to our homes and continue listening to music and reading books and doing the same things day in and day out, the 1% will continue to rule our lives. Dr. King would speak out against the 1%. Dr. King would speak out against a whole list of things. This wave of a lack of leadership has engulfed Pittsburgh, has engulfed our country, has engulfed Washington, and is wreaking havoc on our country. This truth is not just saddening, it is in fact dangerous for the whole world that is in the midst of such great upheaval. The true leadership must learn to look around at the world, at its events and discerning eyes. We must then make true choices regarding the future and direction of our people. I spoke a couple of weekends ago to my fraternity, and after spending some weeks researching what I was going to say, I began to have a conversation with them about how men treat women. And doing my research, I discovered that the #1 health issue for women in America and around the world is violence against women perpetrated by men. Dr. King would have a conversation about that, men. Dr. King would have a clear conversation about that. And so I speak to this community here, this community of men. I want you to work with women to take back the night. I want you to work with women here to make sure no woman is treated without the dignity and the respect she deserves. And I've said this around the country, more women, and probably here, women here probably have the highest grade point average as a group over men. I know your tuition, your enrollment numbers, there are more men here than women, but our young men need to understand at some point their first, second, or third job, they may have a female supervisor. So as we're objectifying women in the classroom and objectifying women in porno and objectifying women around our lives, that same woman may someday be the woman you stare in the face and ask for a raise. So friends, part of our work at university settings is not just to set aside time and space for a women's center. But to set aside time and space for a men's center. The numbers are despicable. The numbers of African American men who graduate from colleges and universities in America. And I'm not sure what your graduation rates are here, but I say to you, we need to figure out how we care for men just as much as we care for women. I believe Dr. King would make this an important issue. I believe Dr. King also would make an issue that we must figure out how we share the wealth, how we share the significance, how we share what we have with others. You see, I don't believe the universe gave me gifts, gave me abilities for me to hoard to myself. So I say to this intellectual group of people here, I say to you, I challenge you to figure out how you give back, because somebody gave up their life for you to be here. I don't care what your ancestry, whether it's German, Italian, Irish, or Africa, You stand on the backs, the shoulders of somebody who bled and died for you to be here. And it's our obligation and our right to give back, to make sure that a whole other generation has the same opportunity. America needs new leadership. And so I say to this population here, I came close to fulfilling my dream. Mrs. King called me shortly after I got back to Kansas City from that first trip. And Mrs. King said, President Carter is looking to appoint a commission of young people. And she said, I gave him Thurgood Marshall's daughter's name. I gave him Andrew Young's daughter's name. And I also gave him a young man's name from Kansas. I gave him yours. And so I was a part of this presidential commission to advise the White House on issues that affect the poor and the disadvantaged. My area of responsibility since I was serving on the Kansas Board of Regents was higher education. And I knew that America needed to figure out how it could fund more poor and middle-class students so they could go to college. So we were able to influence the Carter White House to create legislation to expand the SEOG and to expand the Pell Grant so that more students could go to college. So if any of you are using the Pell Grant, I want my commission. That opportunity led me to go around the country. And if any of you know how political candidates are designed or made, is they put you out there to see how well you do in crowds. They give you a speech and they send you around the country. One weekend I gave 10 speeches around the country. But I was 28 by then. And I had the Democratic Party beginning to speak to me about being governor of Kansas, about being senator from Kansas. But I was 28 years old. I had just gotten married. The best of my life was just ahead of me. My world in many ways was out of control. So I said, Mrs. King, I need to step back. If I were 38 or if I were 48, I'd stay on this trajectory. But at 28, I just can't do it. So friends, I stepped back so that I could be here tonight to say to you that there's opportunities ahead of you. There are things you can do. That by taking advantage of every opportunity, people who come close to you, people who are next to you, that opportunity, that moment in time, when my family was connected to Mrs. King, and I want you to understand, I traveled with her, I was her personal assistant. If you look at the video of her funeral, the King children were sitting on the second or third row, and my family was sitting behind them. I rode from the King family home to the church. New Birth Christian. We rode with them. We have continued our relationship. So what that taught me was there are no accidents in life. You're going to meet people. You're going to sit beside someone in an airplane. You're going to come in contact with someone in a bookstore. Your paths are going to cross people who have significant influence on your life. And some of you are going to walk by them because they don't look like you. Some of you are going to ignore them because they smell different or they look different or they come off different. But I say to you, friends, that may be your ticket to walk into Pittsburgh. That may be your ticket to walk into a whole nother space, a whole nother place in time. Because the universe does not have accidents. It's always creating opportunities for us to get to our dream, to get to our destiny, to get to where we're supposed to be. So I say to you tonight, to take advantage of everything that you're doing here, to learn, to grow, but to walk outside your comfort zones. Walk into places where you are uncomfortable. And I even say to my African American friends, if you have such an organization as the Black Student Union, that's not the only organization you're a part of. You figure out ways that you socialize, get to know people who don't look like you, so that when you end up in corporate America, you know how a white man thinks. So when you get to corporate America, you know how an Indian or a Chinese or a Japanese woman thinks. And you can mingle and you can move and you can act like you know where you are and have the confidence to do so. On so many campuses that I go, the blacks are here, whites are here, the Asians are here. And I'm saying it's time out for that kind of living. It's time out for that kind of learning. If we're going to progress to be a global community, we got to figure out how we have collective dialogue, work together, places to go together, and we move together. Let me close with one of my favorite quotes from Dr. King. The ultimate measure of a man, and I add a woman, is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he or she stands at times of challenge and controversy. The true neighbor will risk his position, his prestige, and even his life for the welfare of others. In dangerous valleys and hazardous pathways, he will lift some bruised, some beaten, some broken person to a higher and more noble life. Carnegie Mellon University, Pittsburgh community. That's our mission, to lift some bruised and broken person to a higher and more noble life. It's my pleasure to be here this evening.